beginning with the story of Hannah, because it's a story that's very common in the Old Testament. And there are many remarkable women in the Old Testament story who have this experience of having been barren or not remembered by God. And the way that the literary structure of the scripture describes it, it is said, the Lord closed her womb. So basically, unable to bear children. If you're part of a culture, a civilization that evolved by trekking through the wilderness for 40 years, you understand, as do many cultures today in very harsh landscapes, that progeny is very important for passing on your genetic line. And as culturally evolved, sons become very important on top of this. Consequently, within the culture and the social and political community of the people of God, a woman who cannot bear children is humiliated, is isolated, is marginalized from her people. She's looked down upon, and she feels a heavy hand of disenfranchisement upon her. Now, Hannah is not the first of these women. If you go way back to the time of Abraham and Sarah, if you go back and reread the story, during their journeys, they were known as Abram and Sarai. And Sarai actually means princess. And Sarai had been barren for many, many years. And they were there in their encampment, and two visitors from God came to see Abraham and to inform him that his wife, who was not only barren but very, very old, was going to have a son. And Sarai, sitting in the tent, overhears this, and she laughs, because she thinks it's a big joke. Consequently, when she does become pregnant and bear a son, she calls him Isaac, which means laughter. Isaac's son Jacob was married to two women. He married first Leah, the older daughter of Laban, his uncle, kind of a distant uncle, and then married the younger daughter Rachel, who was the daughter that he loved, that he fell in love with originally. And Rachel, her womb had been closed. She was barren. But her sister was bearing many children. And eventually, the Lord remembered Rachel. This is how the wording goes. This is how this happened. The Lord remembered Rachel, opened her womb, and she bore two children, Joseph and Benjamin. Okay? So we have that story as well. If you go forward to the New Testament, in the Gospel of Luke, which is the Gospel we'll be reading in the new liturgical year in Advent, you have, in addition to the story of Mary and Joseph, the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah. And Zechariah was a priest, and his wife Elizabeth was a bit older and was barren, and was eventually told that she would conceive a son. And they did have a child and named him John. And of course, we know him as John the Baptist. So there's a theme that runs through the literature of the Old Testament and into the New Testament. The theme of barrenness. And not just of women being unable to have children, but that concept of being forgotten, of feeling like God has forgotten me. God has closed me up. God has made me this way. Okay? And yet, it is in this barrenness that God reaches down to the disenfranchised with blessing. And it's to be noted that anytime this happens, the child that is born out of this blessing is a significant character in the history of the people. Now, we understand that Hannah, after going into the temple by herself, directly in touch with God, which women in that day didn't do, became pregnant and had a son, which she named Samuel, which can mean I asked for him, can also mean I borrowed him. I borrowed him from God. Okay? That Hebrew word can read a number of ways and can also refer to, Samu, can also refer to a deal of lending and borrowing. And if you read a little ahead, when Hannah has declared that Samuel is going to be a servant of God in the temple, she says, in the language of loaning, she says, I am lending him to God. He is lent to the Lord. It is a heartbreaking story because she was barren for many years, and the promise she made to God was, if you will give me a son, I will give him back to you to live in the temple and be your servant. What doesn't come clear or forcibly in the reading today was that the year that she bore him, she did not go to the temple in Shiloh, which was their annual family trip, because she said, I'm home with my child, and when he is weaned, I will take him to the Lord. When he is weaned. Now, not really clear in terms of the tradition when children were weaned, whether they were on the breast for a year or 2 years, but this boy was very, very young when his mother took him to the temple and turned him over to the very priest who thought she was drunk. It's a bit of a twist to the story. And to me, it adds to the poignance of that moment. That not only was she taking the son that she longed for to offer him to the temple, to not be his parent and raise him, but that she had to give him over to Eli the priest, who confronted her and thought she was drunk when she was praying to God. It's a heartbreaking story. But it is the story of God intersecting human life at the place of barrenness. The images that Jesus brings into the minds of his disciples when he talks about the temple are images of barrenness. During the time that Mark was writing this gospel story down, it was about between 60, 70 AD, there was a strong resistance movement in Palestine. And people, the zealots, were coming into the villages and trying to recruit soldiers into the Jewish army that was going to defeat the Roman soldiers, reestablish the Davidic kingdom, and purify the temple in Jerusalem. So you can understand how important it was to Mark to share this story and to share this teaching from Jesus. Many will come in my name. Many will come and try and draw you into the end times. Do not be swayed. Hang in there. Hold on. Because it is not their job to bring this about. It is not their job to bring about the end goal of creation. Wait for the Son of Man. Wait for the Son of Man. So now Jesus is speaking apocalyptically. He's talking about end times. He's talking about the final resolution of the creative process. The process of creation and redemption of this planet. In this day, we have many people that try and recruit us in many directions. For example, it was about 1987 in June that you probably remember this when Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States, and he stood at the Brandenburg Gate on the Berlin Wall and told Mr. Gorbachev to tear down this wall. He was thinking of himself as prophetic. He's recruiting us into a vision of a world that is not threatened by communism. He was trying to bring about the end of the Cold War. It took a couple of years, and the wall came down, 89, 90, okay? Did the world change? Did the world change at the end of the Cold War? It was a few years later when Iraq invaded Kuwait, when terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and hijacked planes. 14 years, and thousands of Americans have been recruited into the war on terror and the countries that foment terror politically. Are we any safer? Are we any more secure? Are we any closer to that end goal that Jesus promised? We are constantly being recruited, as it were, into different mindsets, into different political beliefs regarding the state of the world and what we should be doing about it. I thought it was very sad that the president of France, after the attacks on Friday, declared, "This is war." Not helpful. Not helpful. I read last night something that was posted by a woman who was in one of the clubs that was attacked. I'd like to share that with you. And I photographed it, put it on my phone. Fred, you'd be proud of me. It's right here. Okay. You never think it will happen to you. It was just a Friday night at a rock show. The atmosphere was so happy, and everyone was dancing and smiling. And then when the men came through the front entrance and began shooting, we naively believed it was part of the show. This was a heavy metal rock. It wasn't just a terrorist attack. It was a massacre. Dozens of people were shot right in front of me. Pools of blood filled the floor. Cries of grown men who held their girlfriends' dead bodies pierced the small music venue. Futures demolished, families heartbroken in an instant. Shocked and alone, I pretended to be dead for over an hour, lying among people who could see their loved ones motionless. Holding my breath, trying to not move or not cry, not giving those men the fear they longed to see. I was incredibly lucky to survive, but so many didn't. The people who'd been there for the exact same reasons as I, to have a fun Friday night. This world is cruel, and acts like this are supposed to highlight the depravity of humans, and the images of those men circling us like vultures will haunt me for the rest of my life. But being a survivor of this lets me be able to shed light on something else, to the heroes, to the man who reassured me and put his life on line to try and cover my brain while I whimpered, To the couple whose last words of love kept me believing the good in the world. To the police who succeeded in rescuing hundreds of people. To the complete strangers who picked me up from the road and consoled me during the 45 minutes that I truly believed that the boy that I loved was dead. To the injured man who I'd mistaken for him, and then recognizing he was not my friend, held me and told me everything was going to be fine, despite being all alone and scared himself. To the woman who opened her doors to the survivors. To the friend who offered me shelter and went out to buy new clothes so I wouldn't have to wear the blood-stained shirt. To all of you who have sent caring messages of support, you make me believe this world has the potential to be better, to never let this happen again. But most of this is to the people who were murdered inside the venue, who weren't as lucky, who didn't get to wake up today, and to all the pain that their friends and families are going through. I am so sorry. There is nothing that will fix the pain, and I actually feel privileged to be there for their last breaths, and truly believing that I would join them. I promise to you. She's saying this to us. That their last thoughts were not on the animals who caused all this. It was thinking of the people they loved. And as I lay and wait for my bullet to end my mere 22 years, I envisioned every face that I have ever loved and whispered, I love you, over and over again. Reflecting on the highlights of my life, wishing that those I love knew just how much, and wishing they knew that no matter what happened to me, to keep believing in the good in people, and to not let those men win. Last night, the lives of many were forever changed, and it is up to us to be better people. To live lives that the innocent victims of this tragedy dreamed about, but will not be able to fulfill. Rest in peace, angels. You will never be forgotten. As I read this, I cried last night when I read it. It brought to my mind a quote from Fred Rogers, my most favorite children's TV host, who said, "When I was a boy, and I used to see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. There will always be people there who are helping." And when these things happen, and I deeply appreciate this woman sharing the depth of her story, not only the horror of what happened, but she lifted up, she raised up the helpers. The people who were brave enough to go into this and put their own lives on the line to help and protect others. And that is our crowning human drama, is how we are here for each other. It was poignant for me to come in this morning and pick up a bulletin, and then all it says is that these are but the birth pains. These are but the birth pains. And we all know that at that moment when the Lord opens the womb and makes way for the miracle of birth, those of us who give birth have to go through a fair bit of pain to get there. And that's the image that comes to us this weekend. These are the times that are going to purify us. The times that are going to make us dig down deep and find it within ourselves to understand forgiveness in newer and deeper and more profound ways. I'd like to share with you a last reading. Brief. This is a message to those in the world who would spread fear and anguish by the murder of innocent people. This is the message. You will not succeed. Our hearts are filled with love and fearlessness, even as we ache for those that suffer by your hand. We are ruled by compassion and have the bravery to be unafraid in the face of your campaigns of terror. We will breathe into peace. We will breathe into peace. We will breathe into peace until you are no longer. And this is the good news. Amen. I invite you to take some time to be in silence and quiet reflection before we sing again.